Norman Education Research Day 2022, or as we affectionately, and I think the best name of any kind of research conference, welcome to MERIT. And welcome to being in presence with colleagues and friends and potential collaborators and peers. And welcome to those of you who are joining us online. I'm Jonathan Sherbino, I'm the Assistant Dean for MERIT. This day is brought to you by the McMaster Education Research Innovation and Theory program and the Health Sciences Education Graduate Program. And it's named after Geoff Norman, who is here, who has a very significant role in supporting and advancing health professions education research, both here at McMaster University, but across our community at large. We have a very full day, so some early just forward information pieces, and then we'll get to what I think is going to be an exciting day of plenary sessions, 2 parallel concurrent streams of research abstracts, an opportunity to network over lunch and see posters, and then a concluding panel presentation. We have a lot planned, and hopefully this will be a really exciting day as we kind of mark the beginning of our graduate program and perhaps the end for those academic sector. First, McMaster University is no longer requiring mandatory masking, but it recommends and we encourage you to think about what kind of connection or what kind of space you're in. And so to be thoughtful in your own determination of what kind of masking protocol, particularly when you're in proximity patterns. There's a lot of information and we try to minimize our imprint and our impact. And so you can find all of the details around abstracts and session details and where to go and how to find it at the normanresearchday.ca website. Of course, we'll have some signage. Briefly, most of the plenary sessions or most of the concurrent sessions are on the second floor. There are stairs to your left and there's elevators to your far left. But there's one session that will happen on the same floor around to the right. You'll see some signage directly there. We want to hear from you. Your input and your feedback help influence and design and continually change how we're delivering Norman Education Research Day. And so you can find on the NERD website, that's normanresearchday.ca, an opportunity for you to provide feedback in this direction. One of the things you really like and how we want to see it improve for next year. We're also giving away a lot of prizes, and so we'd love to see you on Twitter. The hashtag is year2022. We'll keep track of the best and most interesting for the tweet chat or stream that you want to put up there, and we will be in contact with you later as a project. So let your competitive or social media streak out. I think before we begin our day looking at education scholarship, I think it's really important for us to consider where we're situated. The McMaster's on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Mississauga. This is a territory that is acknowledged as unceded territory, protected under the Dish with One Spoon Law. And I think as we begin this day and we are engaged with ideas and as we think about what scholarship means, we shouldn't do it in isolation. We should think about what is the ways that we understand our past and our ways of understanding knowing. What does it mean when we think about engagement with First Nations? And how should we think and structure and consider how we pursue scholarship? What does it mean to have different ways of knowing? And how should we structure and think about how we disseminate and share information to the whole? And so now I want to turn and introduce our plenary speaker, Dr. Andrea Gingerich. Dr. Gingerich is the Assistant Professor in the Division of Medical Sciences at the University of British Columbia, University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. She teaches within the Northern Medical Program and is a scholar with the Center for Health Education Scholarship. I follow her research program closely because I'm fascinated with the ideas and the conclusions and the questions that she puts forward. You see that she's going to be thinking and presenting to us on the idea of failure to fail. And she has developed a whole research program that looks at how preceptors think when assessing, supervising, and maintaining boundaries of science. Dr. Gingerich.
Thank you for the introduction. It's so exciting to be here. It's great to be here in person. We get to do things that we weren't doing in Zoom or couldn't be bothered to do in Zoom. I'm wearing heels. Teresa noticed this. She asked me, do you still have the ability to walk in heels? I'm not sure. We're about to find out. I'll try to stay close to the podium just in case I don't have that ability anymore. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. I am going to be sharing some findings that were funded through Medical Council of Canada grant and also through a Assembler grant. So we're here today, we're in person, but I don't know about you, over the last couple of years, I've felt like I've lost touch with a lot of my colleagues. So what a great opportunity to get a bit reconnected. You know that I'm interested in raters and how they think when they're assessing other people, especially in the workplace. But I know some of you don't know how I got interested in this. So I'd like to share a little bit about that. So it all started long, long ago in a land far, far away when I was a PBL tutor. Yes, I'm actually using a PBL example while I'm at McMaster. Send me good witches. So I was a PBL tutor, and it became very obvious that PBL tutors were not identifying underperforming students. And this meant that clerkship was a bit mixed with us because now they had to deal with these students. So we weren't picking up the underperforming students within PBL. And I was coming across my first opportunity to be able to fail an underperforming student. And I was extremely stressed about failing any student. I was particularly stressed with failing this student because there were other tutors who thought that they were the most outstanding PBL student they had ever come across. Now I need to give you some context for this. I am at a regional campus. At that time, we had 24 students in our cohort, 3 PBL groups. I was one of 4 PBL tutors who tutored almost every block throughout the years. We got to know our students very well. So to have such discrepant assessment judgments, it seemed problematic to me, even though at that point I knew nothing about the medical education literature. So, sorry, I'm losing track of where I am. This might change a little bit. Okay, so let's get your input on it. So this was something that I thought problematic. This was my first experience. I would love to hear about your experiences failing an underperforming trainee, not failing an underperforming trainee, almost not failing an underperforming trainee. So what I would like you to do is just your nearest neighbors, I want you to bring those memories to the front of your mind, just take a couple minutes, get some of those reasons that got you on the road, and then I'll come back and just do a speed round and get a few reasons of what got your way. Ready? I'm just going to give you a few minutes here. underperforming trainee? Yes.
They tried really hard.
They tried really hard, you felt bad. Yeah. Over here somewhere? Another reason? Doesn't have to be your own, maybe just heard it from neighbor? Yeah.
More work to fail someone that
It is so much more work to fail them. It's not worth the effort. Yes. Yes.
not ready to deal with the unpleasantness that follows.
Sorry?
Not ready to deal with the unpleasantness that
Oh, the unpleasant, those difficult conversations. Yes, and I expected your reasons to fail in the fail literature. So the first three are a lot about the rater and the things that are inconvenient or difficult for them. Things like, what if they give me a bad teaching evaluation? It impacts my career if I do it. We're going to be future colleagues at some point. What if they cry? You know, all these sorts of things we came up with. The last three are a bit more about how the system design choices impact and can provoke some of this misbehavior from raters. So the last one, if there's no remediation available for a trainee, it's very difficult for supervisors to then flag them and feel good about it. Or if there's some situations you flag them and nothing really happens. So I go through my first experience, and it wasn't too long after that that I started getting more involved with mapping development for PBL, including rater training. This was also about the time that failure to fail papers started to come out. Well, I learned about this and I thought, this could be my thing. I am going to tackle this rater misbehavior problem because I have a lot of experience convincing people to do things that are inconvenient, difficult, painful. At that point, I had been a physiotherapy assistant, a personal trainer, helping people rehab painful injuries. I had been a hockey trainer and a naturopathic doctor, convincing people to make inconvenient lifestyle diet changes. I even drove the bookmobile to libraries in Huron County and convinced country kids to get excited about reading in the summer. I can do this. But those hopes and dreams would be crushed as I started a series of conversations with someone who had just moved to our Center for Health Education Scholarship. And in those conversations, he pushed me to think about, where's that variability coming from? How could the two PBL tutors in such a small program have such disagreement over their assessment judgments? And I left those conversations confused quite often, but also eager to dig into those answers and to start a program of research. And I wouldn't have finished that PhD, and I wouldn't be here today without the incredible support and guidance of Andrea. So even now, as I look at the failure to fail literature, I think this is the common conceptualization of that phenomenon. So at some point in time, a trainee's underperformance becomes obvious within a program, and then it needs to be dealt with. And when the program looks back over the assessment data that has been collected, there's a conspicuous lack of evidence of that underperformance. And so it's assumed the supervisors must have known about this underperformance since it is so obvious, and yet they were reluctant or hesitant or unwilling to put that down on assessment forms. And if you ask them in research, they give lots of reasons for why they are hesitant and reluctant and unwilling to write it down on assessment forms. But since that research came out and I first became aware of it, there have been monumental changes to our curricula, to our assessments. We moved to competency-based medical education. We have programmatic assessment principles. We have changes that address a lot of those design issues that can provoke raters to not fail failing students. And yet, there are still concerns underperformance is underreported. So this is something I want to study in a bit more detail. It seems to me that most research has focused on that time when underperformance is obvious and could, and isn't always documented. But I was interested in the phase before that, when I wanted to know, how do supervisors in particular recognize underperformance? And so we started doing that research. So today I decided to pick 3 things that I've learned, mostly the hard way, about raters, how they think when they're assessing trainees, and how that ties to assessing underperformance. And the first is that I really consider the raters, the supervisors, the people who are doing the assessing as the instrument, as the people who are detecting and getting that assessment information, determining who is underperforming, who's excelling, those sorts of things. Yes, they communicate that through a form has items on it, it's within assessment processes of a larger assessment system, but I really think they're important. This isn't the only way to see assessment, I'm not going to try to convince you it's the best way to see assessment, but it's kind of the perspective that I'll be sharing today. In recent research, we talked to dozens of supervisors, multiple specialties, about their experiences with underperforming trainees, and we actually ended up learning a lot about their expectations for all trainees. And I've tried to represent that here. So they told us they expected trainees to show up, prepared, on time, to be willing to engage in learning opportunities that came along, to then get some feedback, some teaching, do their own learning, and the next time they come along to that learning opportunity, to try to apply, get teaching, learning feedback in it, get a little bit better, try again, get some more feedback, learning, and just this iterative cycle of trying, learning, and it's going to get a little bit better so that they will move from whatever stage they're at, but a somewhat more simplistic, rudimentary version of what they needed to do, and increasingly progress towards something that was more sophisticated and advanced. They expected that some trainees would take longer to do this, that they would need more learning opportunities, so a bit more feedback to be able to get up to where they're supposed to be. This was not considered underperformance. They expected that all trainees would do things incorrectly, inexpertly, incompletely when they were trying to engage. This was just part of learning. This was not underperformance. They expected that all trainees, with something in particular, would need a lot of extra support and guidance and supervision. Maybe a notoriously difficult thing to learn, maybe it's a complex patient situation. That was not underperformance. It was underperformance when the trainee was no longer making progress. Their progress was stalled because they were unable or unwilling to engage with this process of learning in the different learning opportunities, getting feedback, applying it, and moving along. And this was happening despite the supervisor increasing their supervision, watching more closely, more direct observation, giving more feedback, doing more teaching. So how's that kind of resonating with your experiences of underperformance? So there from the program perspective. So when programs are grappling with failure-to-fail phenomenon, often what they want to do is to detect underperformance earlier. And our research points to some places where this might not be as easy to do as you think it would. So for example, supervisors told us that often those early signs that could be signs of underperformance, they were hardly ever indicative of an underperforming trainee. That when you watched a bit more closely, you watched over the next few learning opportunities, they were doing just fine. It was a blip, it was something temporary that needed to be dealt with, it was dealt with, and they're totally fine. Other things that are difficult for detecting it earlier, it just takes a long time to notice that pattern and get to that stage of watching the trainee, how they're engaging with the learning and that iterative cycle. Recognize that you need to increase your supervision and then watch how they're responding to that increased supervision and can they apply that extra teaching and feedback into the learning opportunities. And supervisors told us they often didn't have enough time with the trainees based on how the curricula was set up to be able to get to that stage where they felt confident that what they were dealing with was an underperforming trainee. Related to that is that programs want to have underperformance reported earlier, whether that's informally or preferably formally in some sort of documentation. And our research suggests some places where it could be difficult to move it up too early. So one is that supervisors told us that they give corrective, constructive, critical feedback to many trainees, and this was not indicative of underperformance. So if we wanted to have that type of feedback documented as narrative comments, I think we'd have to convince supervisors that is for the benefit of the trainee and not being used to flag underperformance. And if it was being used within our processes to flag or screen for underperformance at least, we need to have processes in place to make sure we're filtering through what might be quite a few false positives. We also, for reporting underperformance, that early stage of trying to figure out what you're seeing, The supervisors haven't categorized the trainee as underperforming then, so it would be odd to expect them to mark on a form that the trainee was not meeting expectations or not on track at that stage. So there'd have to be enough time before they would even have access to that kind of information to be able to mark it down. And also, more broadly, in the failure to fail literature and also in our own research, we find that early on, supervisors doubt their own assessments a bit, kind of like I did, and give the trainee the benefit of the doubt and want to gather more information to be sure what's going on. They tend to be on the side of the trainee, be an advocate for the learning, want them to get the learning resources that they need to be successful, have some empathy for the trainee's experience, maybe even some pity for the struggle that they're trying so hard to learn and are having more difficulty with it than trainees normally do. And this leads to the second thing that I've learned, that graders are people with real human emotions, that supervisors are people who form relationships with trainees as their teacher, as their mentor, as their coach, as a future colleague. And this shouldn't be controversial. And of course, really, it isn't controversial. It's just that it doesn't fit all that well with some of our assessment systems that really need graders to be more of a neutral observer or an objective assessor. And even if we've been able to convince ourselves that emotions are forbidden from assessment and set them aside, emotions still exist. And more than that, I think they could be used to help improve the assessment data that we collect. How could that be possible? I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself as a supervisor and as a finely tuned detector of underperformance, ready to spot an underperforming trainee and underperformance, and then to use those feelings that you get to prompt an assessment activity. So you notice something odd, a little bit unusual in what the trainee's doing. Your instinct will likely be to pay more attention to it and to try to figure out what's going on, to make sense of it. So do that, but also take some notes for yourself. It might be nothing, but future you might really appreciate that you have some details about what caught your eye and exactly what the trainee was doing at that moment. Now, when do we start to feel more surprised or astonished at what the trainee is doing or how they're interacting with these learning opportunities and feedback? Maybe even you can't believe that they've made it this far in the program without being able to do these certain things or able to learn in the way that most trainees learn. Well, this would be a good time to make sure how you can complete those low-stakes formative assessments. And if not, let's do some. Let's get some concrete examples on paper. Again, it's likely too early to flag this trainee, but if it's that unusual, it'd be nice to have some descriptions of what's happening, because it might benefit that trainee later on. Someone else could put this pattern together and help support or maybe modify their progression through the program a little bit. Now, what if you're feeling frustrated while supervising this trainee? Or for some of you, maybe you're feeling more frustrated than the normal of supervising trainees. That could be a good indication to just take a pause and think, there's something different going on here. Am I supervising harder than I normally am? Am I needing to watch more closely? Am I needing to do more teaching, give more feedback? And if so, it sounds like that trainee may be progressing a bit differently than the other trainees you've had. Are they underperforming? Well, good time to dig out the criteria and what trainees should be able to do at that exact point in your program, or to get in contact with someone who has that criteria, and then start to compare. What are they supposed to be able to do? What am I seeing them do? And document some of that moving forward. Now, when did you start to feel certain that this trainee should fail, even though previously it has benefited the doubt? Well, this is a point that I want to talk about a little bit further. Because this switch from benefit of the doubt, without a doubt, from hesitancy to certainty, from being on the side of the trainee and being their advocate, to now feeling you need to step into a role where you are a gatekeeper and want to prevent harm from happening to current, future patients, maybe even to the profession. That switch sounds a lot like a tipping point. So a tipping point is a threshold. It's a threshold where we've noticed enough changes that have been accumulating that we now diagnose a change has happened. So it's a recategorization from one thing to another, and it comes with a reframing of what that situation or who that person is. So it goes from stop to go, or from good to bad. And it implies that there's some action you can now take that was different than when you categorized them the other way. Our research linked this with two different things. One was recognizing a pattern of profound underperformance that was indicative of failure. This was things like overwhelming evidence of underperformance in multiple things from multiple people across time. But it could also be a single error, if that error was a never event, or it was a type of error that really seemed to demonstrate that the trainee lacked a fundamental understanding of the basic concepts that they needed to have at that point in time. There was also a pattern where, the supervisor of the program wasn't quite sure that this was underperformance. There have been some signs, maybe yes, but then others definitely not. And it went back and forth for a bit, and then a call would come from a colleague on a different service and said, I need to tell you about an incident with your trainee last night. And what they described made everything just kind of click into place. You're like, yes, this is underperformance and we do need to do something about it. The other thing we linked it to was anger. Now, related to frustration, we can see that it's there in the data. The methodology we use doesn't let us point out its exact role. Is it a coincidence that it's there? Is it a catalyst that pushes people over that threshold of the tipping point? Is it a byproduct of recognizing how futile your increased supervisory efforts are and helping this trainee to progress? But there is a literature on anger, and it tells us anger is a moral emotion. We have it in response to knowing wrongdoing or injustice. It's also a mobilizing emotion. It compels us to take action against that injustice. And by bringing those literatures in to help us understand our situation of assessing underperformance, we learned a few things. So you've likely heard of tipping points, but there's a science behind it. And in experimental studies, what we've learned is that we tip and go over that threshold more quickly than we estimate we do, using less information than we think we do. And the anger research tells us that when we're angry, our information seeking and our decision making on information is adversely affected. So both of these things are kind of a warning that we may be unable to see signs of improvement once we've labeled a trainee as underperforming and have them in remediation or have failed them. And there's a bunch of different cognitive processes that have been indicated in this. But the bottom line is that this is likely the sort of thing that we can't overcome just by being aware of it and diligent against it and being mindful of what we're doing. Instead, we're going to need to have processes in place that can accommodate that we may be unable to see signs of improvement even when they're there. So I think up until now, we've really been prioritizing solutions for failure to fail phenomenon, and appropriately so. But now I think we hopefully have a bit more of a motivation to make sure we're also prioritizing our solutions for, I guess we could call it failure not to fail phenomenon. And I know at McMaster your programs have things in place that would help to accommodate this, so getting fresh eyes on trainees' learning once they've been labeled as underperforming, having learning contracts that specify exactly what a trainee would need to do during remediation to be back on track to help prevent shifting standards that can happen. But some places don't, and I hope this is a bit of encouragement to look into how we can avoid missing improvement. So we have some fallibilities as humans that need to be accommodated within our assessment systems. But one of the first things I learned is that raters aren't as idiosyncratic as they first appear. So yes, we give wildly variable ratings even when we're trying not to. And you know what, let's just get a sense of how variable those ratings can be. So I'm going to show you just a brief clip of, let's say they're a second-year internal medicine resident taking a history. I want everyone to come up with a rating. Even if it's not what you normally do, I want you to pick a number between 1 and 9 that best represents how well she did in doing this interview. The mini-CX clinical competence scale is a global rating. It goes from 1 to 9. 1 is very unsatisfactory, 9 is very superior. So everyone come up with a number based on this. And then I'm going to compare it to findings that we found through research.
What were you doing? I had a cough now for at least 3 weeks. It doesn't seem to go away. And there are times when I feel short of breath. It's really messing right now.
Are you bringing up anything with cough?
Yeah, I started to cough up some phlegm about 2 weeks ago.
What's the phlegm look like?
It's just clear.
You said you're short of breath?
Yeah.
When do you notice that?
I've been short of breath, like after I walk upstairs or when I exercise.
Can you make it up the whole flight of stairs?
No, I haven't been able to.
And what type of exercise are you talking about?
Well, I used to do Stairmaster 3 times a week and I haven't been able to do that.
Do you have any chest pain?
I don't have pain, but I get like a tightness in my chest when I get short of breath.
So you hurt when you take a deep breath?
No.
Have you noticed any wheezing?
A few times I've noticed my breath making a whistling noise. Is that easy?
Sounds like it could be. If you're short of breath at night?
Yeah, I have. Probably have like coughing, and things like that.
Do you feel like anything triggers the cough?
No, I'm not sure.
Any new exposures that you know about, like you've got new carpets in your house, new pets?
No new pets, but I started a new job.
What's that?
I'm a receptionist at a veterinary clinic.
When did that start?
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. Based on that clip, does everyone have a rating in mind? Okay. I want to have some fun here, that we're in person, so I don't want to have to use an electronic polling system. I would like to build a human bar graph to collect your ratings today so that we can compare them to research ratings. So I need 9 volunteers who are not easily embarrassed. Thank you, to come up, and you are going to try to represent how many hands go up for each of these ratings with your body. Yes, so who needs to move around right now? Let's go. Yes, please. 9 people.
I'm very short, so I'm gonna go on this side.
You should go on the side or the far end. You need to be on the end.
Yeah. Are we gonna like line up in order?
Yeah, let's line up in front of one of these so that we can.
I'm short, so I'm thinking 3. Okay, well, why don't you be 2 then? Okay. Make the bell curve.
I'm gonna be on this
We
end.
can always switch spots if it's easier to just do it by
I might have to.
Okay.
You're tall, so you should be in the middle somewhere.
You should maybe be
Because otherwise the bar graph doesn't
Okay,
work.
but it kind of depends on the.
Well, but you'll see.
Okay. We're gonna
It's a bar, it'll be a bar graph.
Need one more.
One more.
I'm running to watch you. Don't look at me.
Put him in the middle there.
Jeff might have to go in the middle.
I should be at one end, obviously.
All right, ratings. Who give a rating of 1? Okay, so you guys are 0. I mean, like, I just need as a bar graph. How many rating of 2?
Oh, there you go.
1. Okay. A rating of 3. 3, 4, 5, something like that. Okay. 4. Oh, we have more, some more up here. Okay, yeah. So we're probably up to like 6, at least 8. Okay. A rating of 4. We have lots. You have to be very strong, Meredith. Maybe your arms up. Arms up. Okay. Let's move them quickly. Rating of 5. We also have lots. Okay. We might have to make this taller up to see. A rating of 6. Not very many. A rating of 7. We've got nothing. Here, nothing. Okay. A rating of 8. Anyone with 8? Anyone with 9? Okay. Jeff cannot lay down with his back right now.
If I get down, someone's gonna have to pull me back.
You can go sit right now if you want in your chair. This is good. Okay, just hold close. We're going to compare it to research ratings. This is UBC and UOT raters. How does it compare? Okay, some similarities, some differences. And then how about assessment experts from across North America?
Okay.
Okay, nice. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I need some fun. So let's take a look at these ratings. So these are the ones we got in research. There's a few differences. One is that in the research, the ratings went from 1 to 7 in both of these studies. So quite a wide range, from very unsatisfactory to some people thinking that it was superior. We also have in both, let's see, go back here, the most common rating was a 3, and then the second most common rating was a 5, not a 4, which is kind of weird. To me, this is a pattern. I was surprised that we got such similar ratings across the two studies that were using different methodologies and different people. But what does this pattern mean? Can someone who gave around a rating of 3, could you just kind of briefly describe what your assessment judgment was? Yes.
They were able to get the questions in that they needed to make an assessment, but the way that they were interacting with the patient was very impersonal, almost cold, no eye contact.
Right. Right. So they're asking most of the right questions, focusing on the task, maybe on efficiency, and that came at the sacrifice of their rapport building and how they were asking the questions. But overall, it was okay. Room for improvement, but okay. Someone who gave a 3. So that was a 3. That was a 3. What did someone give for a 5? I'm guessing that was similar for a 5. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, I would give you a similar explanation. I agree on is what did she lack that made her unsatisfactory? But I felt that she would see to the point of the actual why the patient came in, and so she was going to get to where she needed to be, despite perhaps lack of professionalism and the cherry on top. But
okay. And someone else who gave a failing rating. How would you get it?
I think the one thing that kind of confuses, I don't know if you said it in every semester, but I also not sure what stage your residency they're supposed to do that. But this is a kind of like a more senior resident that's got a fair history of practice, and that's a more unorganized, chaotic interview that hoped they would have fixed some of this stuff by now.
Okay.
Whether it's like a new resident trying out of medical school, or they're kind of they're asking some of the questions, but there's obviously some stuff missing, and I think that would be
okay, you would have liked to see a better stream of questions that reflected some clinical reasoning?
Exactly.
Perhaps? Okay, someone else who gave a failing besides you? Yeah.
I was gonna say, I thought she was pretty cohesive on the questioning. So from my perspective, it feels more of a satisfactory assessment in that, yes, I agree with what the person there said that the empathy would match with the cherry on top, and I agree that a more senior resident should be assessing those and have that as part of the competencies, but in terms of getting the requisite information, I think she did a satisfactory job.
The patient told her that she was waking up at night, she was really worried about this condition, and she had to stop doing some activities that she enjoyed doing. And the resident did not react to any of those things at all. She didn't even say that sounds difficult. Zero response to that.
Yeah, kind of oh. Yeah. Okay, so this fits fairly well with what we found in both studies. So there's kind of these two different points of view, and we have people who were giving it a 5 or a pass tended to describe it like she was sacrificing rapport, but asking most of the right questions in the right way, and so it was okay, but room for improvement. People who gave it a 3 tended to describe this as her lack of rapport was potentially harmful because she was likely to miss important history, especially with some patients, even if it wasn't with this patient, and therefore it needed to be adjusted and improved for the safety of everyone involved. Okay, so that's what we found, and it explained a lot of variance in rating because now you have these two different bullseyes and a bit of variability around them instead of this huge range of variability. What does this mean for failure and fail? So is it everyone who described it as being okay? Like, would they be failing to fail? Is it just the people who described it as failing but then gave a 4 or 5 as a rating? Like, would that be failing to fail if we were using this as a case example? Or is it something else altogether? Is it that actually this was a borderline-ish performance, and the people who were failing her are being affected by the patriarchy, maybe some implicit sexism coming in, and that those ratings are actually the more inappropriate ratings, and it's not failing to fail. So I don't know, and one of the reasons why I don't know is that there's just no gold standard to be able to use for this. So we actually recruited assessment experts, the people that you would get to tell you what, even though it was scripted performance, what level is it at, and still we got fairly similar variability to when we asked people who are just every day assessing residents as part of what we're doing. So I show this, one, to show how variable assessments can be, so if you didn't know, you won't be surprised if you're ever in a situation to receive assessments from supervisors. But also, I just kind of wonder if I'm starting to convince you that there might be a bit more to failure to fail phenomenon than just the part of our raters being reluctant and unwilling to give failing ratings to trainees who should. So those were kind of three of the things that I've learned along the way, and now I kind of want to summarize what we covered and also find some directions where we might be able to use research that focuses on raters and how they think while giving assessments to help us with improving our assessments. And then I'm hoping this will lead to a time when we can have a bit more discussion, and you can let me know which areas you'd like to talk about a little bit more in the question and answer period. This picture of a Calgarian using a MacBook computer to slice a birthday cake just really speaks to me. On a few different levels, actually. But the one that I will share with you today is that I think it captures what the essence of my program of research has been. And that's that I'm not sure we're using supervisors to their full potential as assessors within the workplace. Are we creating assessment forms, processes, and systems that make supervisors function more like a knife, and then even when they perform as best as they can, the best they can ever be is a rather thick and dull knife, when we could be changing things around and use them more like a computer instead of a knife. So it makes me wonder, like, what would assessment look like? What would workplace-based assessment look like if we were custom designing everything based on what supervisors can give us in that moment with the parameters and constraints of being in the workplace and having many other roles to fill? What assessment information can they give us? I don't know what that looks like. I don't think we've achieved it yet, but I find it interesting to think about. And I think if we were to try to get some traction on this, there'd be a few things that would be underlying principles, perhaps, or touch points along the way. One would be to align with the humanists. So I already talked about how we might be able to take advantage of these emotions that we're going to have, no matter if we think that they're too subjective or biasing, but how we can maybe use them to get good assessment information. Other things would be to look at the constraints of that workplace, and then matching up our data collection with the information that supervisors could give us. Things like, if we can't change the length of time or the duration that supervising trainees are paired up together, then match the type of information they could give us in that situation. So a very, very brief relationship may only be appropriate for very descriptive assessment information. And as we get into longer relationships, that might be the time people are appropriate to be asking for more complex, higher level judgments of how well the trainee is doing. So those are adjustments that we could consider. And that ties into this next one of investigating unreasonableness. Now, what I mean here is there will always be a small percentage of raters who will not do what you want them to do, no matter how you change things. And I'm not talking about those raters. I am talking about when you're in a situation where it looks like the majority of people are misbehaving in some way, giving widely variable ratings, giving very vague comments, not completing assessments. That we use that sign as leaders, as assessment designers, to say, okay, we need to look at how reasonable our asks of them are, and then work together to find a middle ground of the information that they, the supervisors, have access to and are willing to give us, and then support them to give us that information well so that we can detect any level of performance, not just underperformance. And even if we were able to capitalize on the strengths of humans as raters, as supervisors within the workplace, and custom design everything around them to take advantage of that, there would still be our probabilities that we would need to accommodate within our processes, within our systems, within our forum. Because even if we were leveraging those strengths of people, not all assessment information they gave us all the time would be high quality assessment data. So we would need to have ways to filter through people being people. And our propensity to be, to skim read things, to cut corners, to have our implicit and overt biases, to make mistakes when filling things out, to let our own points of view interfere with what we're doing, because sometimes those things can give us great information and sometimes they can't. So we would need to make sure that we have the processes in place to be able to deal with that. Now this could come a few different ways. I think a human factors approach would fit best with this sort of reevaluation. So human factors and that acknowledging that you're using humans, we need to know what humans can do well in that situation and what their limits are, and then build around it. So it acknowledges that there are going to be these boundaries on it, as opposed to something like a bias avoidance approach, or something that's trying to get, down to 0 errors, where you're trying to minimize everything, and put a lot of the responsibility on individuals instead of on processes and systems. It may also be that we need to think about workplace-based assessment as a place to screen for underperformance, to look for, just to kind of detect, to cast a wide net, and to have multiple false positives, but to kind of get an idea of who do we need to focus our attention on with other assessment modalities to then diagnose who is underperforming, in what way are they underperforming, and what can we do to support them a bit differently through our program, which works for most people, but not all programs work perfectly for everyone. And maybe through that way, we'd be able to intervene in a more timely way, get people on track sooner, and address the failure component of that. So I tried to touch on a few different areas, share a few different things with you. I'd love to hear what you'd like to talk about a little bit more, and I'm happy to discuss that. I'm glad to see that I've left a bit of time so that we can have a good question and answer period. Thank you. Comments, reactions, questions? Yes.
So that was a great talk. I struggle with this. So I'm married to a physician, and we have very different opinions or very different perspectives for how we address this. So I have very high expectations, and he has a very evidence approach. So I find it hard. Like I don't know how to calibrate. Like he thinks I'm too strict, perhaps, and unreasonable, and I think he just makes allowances. So I'm just wondering, like, I don't know. I don't know where that magical threshold is for when it becomes like underperformance that needs to be reported, or I don't know how you provide guidance on.
Yeah, it's a big decision, isn't it? When you have to use that judgment level, when you're putting it against criteria, it's a lot. I wonder if maybe focusing early on and really helping to get the descriptions of what you're noticing, and getting that as that first assessment data, especially when you're in the workplace and there's not a lot of time to write things down, but just to kind of capture, like, this is what I'm seeing them doing, this is how they're applying feedback, and this is the second time they've done this, and here's how they did the second time. If we start to get that information, could we have processes in place to make sense of it and know how the training is progressing and if they're on track, instead of asking each individual to tell us if they're on track? I think that would fit with some of the ways that we're going, and it might help with this anxiety. Yes, like, I'm a hawk, he's done. How do we have to make sure we have enough hawks and doves to balance each other out if we're trying to take the collection of it. But I don't know, I'm interested to hear what people think of that sort of approach might fit. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
Early on in the talk, you spoke a bit about intuition, and just now you mentioned about how this could be used as a real detection. That, of course, maps onto the whole data processing thing, diagnosis, and not a good idea. Tim, we talked about that. The thing about intuition, of course, is that I suspect there's a real dissociation between how accurate they are and how confident you are. There lies one potential problem. You just don't want it accurate. Has anybody studied the predictive validity of the intuitions in this domain? Because I suspect it's not even specific. What's wrong diagnosis?
I'm not sure. I think there's some stuff coming along. on it. For accuracy is tough, the same as they predicting here is what's the gold standard compared to was it accurate or not. Yeah, so and that's why I wonder about using it more to help hint or nudge us towards documenting other assessment information than using it themselves. So if your intuition is saying something's going on here, to document more than what he's seeing than documenting your intuition. I can't see an assessment form that's based on my feelings, for example, or my spidey senses are tingling, and the closest we get is in some of the trustability gets talk about comfort. If I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. I think those are important feelings. You're picking up on something. Some of the implicit judgment literature from psychology shows that, you walk into a room and you have this feeling that something's different about it. You can't put your finger on it. You're like, something's changed. Often something has changed, right? So we can process a lot more information unconsciously than we can in our conscious. And sometimes it's going to take a while to get it up to our conscious mind. But we can pick up on that word, like when you notice something, if you have that feeling of something has changed, something's different, something's odd, to at least act on getting assessment information down. And then it's going to be combined with a bunch of other information, even if that isn't quite right. If you're documenting things that are what you're perceiving, maybe what you're interpreting, hopefully we can use that at a later time, matched with a bunch of other observations to then look for a pattern and see what's going on. And if done right, and this is what I'm not sure that we have the processes in place yet, to be able to look for which of those observations aren't telling us as much that's useful, and then which ones can go together to tell us something that's quite useful about the training, and then we can.
Thank you, Andrea. This is excellent. In your conclusions about where to go next, you talked about the idea of tolerating fallibility, investigating lack of compliance. And at no point did we talk about pathway development. And I know some of your colleagues from other work would talk about rater training. And I wonder what your thoughts are there, and whether rater training and trying to change the humanness of our raters is maybe a bit of a fool's errand or not.
Yeah, so the role of rater training when it comes to this. I think it's really important that we know how to use our tools correctly, and the type of error that we get from not knowing what we're expected to do with our tools is useless error, and we want to make sure that we get rid of that with rater training. My vision of a rater training that's asking people to change their point of view, like of that video, there's the two different points of view. I don't think it's going to work if what the training is doing is saying, when you see this, the answer is X. Because the points of view are different, and you would get people the people who are seeing as a failing performance, if you tell them that that's a passing, I think it's going to put them out of equilibrium and throw off their other assessments. So trying to get them to consensus, I think, is where we get into confusion, because they're not seeing the same thing in the first place, to be able to say, we'll put the same rating on that. I like rater training where we talk about criteria, where we talk about what did I see, what did you see, to get a sense of what did you miss, what am I thinking about differently, how could I recalibrate on my own with other people. I think that part's helpful. But saying this is a this, without having this conversation around how people could have different interpretations of it, I think will end up causing more problems down the road than solving. Okay, I'm losing track of words, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think one of the problems with failure to fail is the equivalency of failing as harming the learner. So I wonder if you have any comments on how to separate the issue of failing from harming the learner. Because I think that would probably make assessors much more comfortable giving a failing score.
Yeah, I think so. So we go into these professions because we're helpers, and we want to help people. So I think we would have to not just convince people, but also show through our processes that we are using this to support our trainees. And when you we need you to tell us, and then we will do something different. So most of my teaching and leadership is we now do CBL, but small group learning in years 1 and 2. So we ask our tutors, anyone that you're worried about, just let us know, even informally, to start with, because we can do things that aren't official, like make sure their next group, they're in with someone who's a really good tutor, because then we'll really get good assessment information from them and help them learn. So if you tell us, we can do something like that. If you can tell us, we can get them support like on a form officially and say you have a concern, that can make sure that they get formal academic advising before they go on and fail something else. So, and then through many years of showing that we actually do help trainees, if you tell us, then we get more of that information from our tutors. Now, different than the workplace, different than when, the residents, this is part of the job, and there's service, and there's a lot more stakes. I realize that, but I don't have as much lived experience there. But if we were saying, yes, we design the best programs that we can, it works for most people, but we know it's not gonna work for everyone all the time, you need to tell us when it's not working, because then we will adjust it for those people. We can't adjust it for everyone, and then actually show up and do it. I think we'd be able to get some of that. It becomes very difficult when it's a go, no go decision, and it does really interfere with the trainee's ability to progress. It affects their career, it affects their status in Canada. Like, there's a lot of those consequences that I don't want to minimize that. I realize but it seems like there could be ways. There must be possible ways to try to help get that sort of support. So I agree, we need to tap into that. I want to help, even if it's difficult. We break bad news to patients, we have them do things that we know is going to be painful in the short term, but we know it's going to be better. So I know that we are all capable of doing this if we can prove that, that we will actually follow through on that as the leaders and assessment designers.
One thing that I would be more concerned about in this kind of a professional program, although I've done it for undergraduate students, is does the student recognize what the issues are? So we used to have something here called a triple jump, in which case the final evaluation was based on a rubric, 2-page rubric that the student filled out and the preceptor filled out. And then afterwards there was this discussion about the discrepancy, if any, of the two. So in this case, I would say to the student, I would show them the video and give them a very specific rubric of what the criteria for evaluation was. And then look to see whether or not on the video they could say, boy, that the pencil flipping and the non-engagement was important, and I need to work on that. And if a student in a professional program can't do that themselves, that's a bigger problem than not being able to do it.
Yes, so we did hear that, and I'll try to summarize briefly for people who couldn't hear. I think you're touching on self-awareness, of being able to point out to someone, here's what I'm seeing, can you see that you're also doing that, and how that might be problematic, and why I would want you to change it. And if they can't see that, then it's very difficult to help them. And we saw that as part of that recognizing underperformance part, that was part of them not progressing. If they weren't engaging in that feedback, and sometimes people use the word insight, if they lacked insight into what was going on or that they needed to improve, then it came to the point, well, now I need to flag or fail them to bring in other support and help them get someone who can show them that this actually is something that they need to change. So I do think it's problematic, and I'm not entirely sure how we get at it. It does sound like it's rare, but that when it happens, it takes a lot of work, and it's very frustrating to try to help those trainees to improve what they're doing, even when you have video evidence and you're sitting there saying, see this, or frame our feedback in a conversation way. Like, some people might perceive your history-taking skills here as a bit of an interrogation. How does that land with you? How can we change this so that it felt like a little bit friendlier or something? Yeah. Yes.
Thanks for sharing your work today. There were definitely some moments of self-reflection of how I do assess too. So I really appreciated that aspect. I'm thinking a bit more about the self-assessment tool that what we all did here with the human scale. How important is providing criteria for each MERIT? Is there importance to it? Can it be problematic when assessing candidates and in whatever program?
Sorry, so the question is that extra variance that may be problematic for candidates?
Yeah, is there a benefit for reducing iterator variability, but are there problems associated with having this very strict type of scale?
Yes, so the variability is especially problematic when we have it within systems that are considering supervisors, graders to be taking a measurement of how much competence. Now, we can average across it, it'll help. Some people are worried that the variability of mixed messages to a trainee. So, this person's telling me I'm doing well when I do it this way, I go to another person, they tell me I'm not doing it well. I think certainly trainees are going to have to deal with those differences in preferences and in procedures as they go from supervisor to supervisor. So it's something that they're going to have to grapple with. It becomes a bit more stressful when it has an assessment judgment tied to it. So that can be problematic. If we're looking at it and making sense of it, I think it can be useful when we see these divergent points of view, that just knowing that there is a divergent or a bipolar type of perspective on it, it might tell us something about that person or how they're perceived. So if we think about celebrities, and the ones that everyone loves, everyone hates, and then the ones that there's a split, there's something about those people that have that, like some people love them, some people hate them, right? Like just knowing that you can think about those certain people. So I think it would be helpful, if I was a trainee and people were having these mixed opinions, to get that information and think about, how do I adjust when I'm working with certain people? Like, is there a certain type of patient where I need to do things especially differently than what my usual is now? Do I need to adjust with this other patient? Do I need to adjust how I do things with different supervisors? And that the world is not going to be consistent for them. So that some of this is that they're going to inherently have to grapple with. I'm actually a fan of using psychometrics and having some device-based assessments as part of a larger assessment program. And there, I would like to see inter-rater variability, getting people trained, because you know ahead of time what that station is, and you can help people go through every little thing, like for a NOSCI. That is a different, and I think we can use that very well and take advantage of measurement. In the workplace, we can't take advantage of all that stuff. So I think we're left with, there's going to be variability of context, and so we need to, I would prefer to find ways to take advantage of it instead of trying to quell it all the time. Other questions? I know I missed some people, I'm sorry.
We have a couple minutes before we're going to transition. Maybe a final thought you want to say. Maybe the question I would ask is, are we doing better? We've done so much to our system, developing rubrics, moving from knowledge to performance in authentic assessment, helping to move from a high to a low stakes. But what I hear with your presentation is that the heart of our systems are people. And so are our systems better today?
So I think yes, I do. Compared to that form I had to fill out originally that caused this whole problem, that was a go, no-go decision based on one PBL tutor that was rolled up that student. Compared to now, I fill out a similar form and it's information that would flag and has supervisor flags. I think we're doing better construct alignment of what we're asking supervisors to do with our scales and our forms that match with the supervisor to the workplace. I'd just like to expand that work, just go beyond that and better capitalize on what we can do as people in that workplace.
So with that, thank you very much, Dr. Gingerich, for challenging us. Thank you all for joining, and for those of you online for joining us. We'll see you later today for the closing panel discussion. We have a fairly brief transition. You may have decided which rooms you're going to. There is one room on the right as you exit, and then the remainder rooms are on the second floor. You can find stairs to your left or the elevator to your very far left. We're going to have a hard start for 10:15 so that we can keep on track and have equal time for all of our presenters to present today.